This is my true story. My son thought I was too weak to fight back. He let his wife humiliate me at the dinner table, calling me useless, old, and a burden. He smiled as she spoke, thinking I would swallow the shame like soup. He even whispered to her, thinking I couldn't hear. Once he's gone, it's ours. But what he didn't know was that I had already prepared my answer. I stayed silent. I smiled, and then I signed the papers. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe so more people hear my story. All my life I worked with one thought in my heart. If I cannot give my son respect with words, I will give him respect with actions. Every coin I saved, every piece of land I bought, every contract I signed, I thought of him. I thought of his future. I thought if he had a roof, he would never know hunger. If he had money in the bank, he would never know fear. I never wore gold rings or rich clothes. I never bought new cars. I never traveled the world. My world was him. My joy was in his comfort. The house he lived in was built on the sweat of my back. The business he bragged about at parties had seed money from me. Even when I was tired, when my bones ached, I kept working because I believed family was the only true investment. I told myself, one day, when I am too old to stand, he will help me sit. One day, when I am too old to speak, he will give me words of kindness. That was the trade I thought I was making. Money for love, work for care, sacrifice for respect. But life does not always pay back the way you expect. I remember signing the papers for the house he and his wife now claim as their own. I remember the bank loan that almost crushed them, and how I stepped in and paid it off. I told myself it was not charity, it was duty. A father does not watch his son drown. He builds the bridge, he throws the rope, he carries the weight. I carried it gladly. At that time his wife smiled and called me generous. At that time my son hugged me and said he would never forget. Funny how words that are spoken in comfort vanish in the smoke of comfort. People remember promises only when they are hungry, not when they are full. As the years passed, I built a nest egg, not a small one. I worked nights, invested in land, bought shares, signed deals. Some failed, some succeeded, but I never stopped. Quietly, slowly, carefully, I built a wall of security so high that storms could not touch it. By the time I was old, it was worth millions. $3.1 million to be exact. A number that could save generations, a number that could change lives. I thought it would be my son's shield. I thought it would be his blessing. I thought it would be his wife's comfort too. That was my mistake. I believed that money buys loyalty. I believed that sacrifice earns gratitude. I believed blood always remembers. I sat at dinners watching them laugh, watching them live well, never reminding them of the foundation under their feet. The foundation was me, my back, my years, my time. But I stayed quiet. I did not want thanks. I only wanted respect. I only wanted dignity at the table I built. But respect cannot be bought. Dignity cannot be purchased. When a person decides you are worthless, no number in the bank can change their mind. My son's wife was clever. She dressed in silks, she spoke with sugar, but her eyes always searched for weakness. She saw me slowing down. She saw my hands tremble when I reached for a glass. She saw my steps lose speed on the stairs. And she smiled. Not the smile of kindness, but the smile of someone who thinks they have already won. She whispered to my son that I was too old, that I was in the way, that I had served my use. And he listened. He did not defend me. He did not remind her who paid for their comfort. He let her words sit in the room like poison. Still, I stayed silent. Still, I believed. I told myself, maybe they are tired, maybe they are stressed, maybe tomorrow they will be kinder. I excused them. I forgave them. But forgiveness does not cure rot. Once respect is gone, words only dig the grave deeper. The humiliation began small. A joke about my hearing, a comment about my slow eating, a sigh when I asked a question. Each moment tiny, but each cut sharp. My investment was not only in money now, it was in patience. I thought patience would win back love. I was wrong. Looking back now, I see clearly. The money was never the problem. The problem was that I gave them everything too easily. I erased their struggle, and in doing so, I erased their respect. They never knew what it meant to fight for a roof. They never knew what it meant to sweat for food. They only knew ease, and ease turns hearts cruel. What you do not earn, you do not value, and what you do not value, you mock. That night at the dinner table when she humiliated me, I felt the full weight of my mistake. My investment had not bought me a family, it had bought me a prison. I was the old man in the corner, tolerated only because my money had not yet been written away. They thought I was too weak to act. They thought I was waiting for the end. But they forgot one thing. The pen is heavier than gold, and the will of an old man can rewrite the future. As I looked at them laughing, as I felt the burn of shame in my chest, I knew something they did not. My investment was not trapped. My investment was not chained. My investment was mine, and I still had the power to move it. Quietly, with no shouting, no fight, no public war, I would shift everything. I would take the house they called theirs and place it beyond their reach. I would take the money they thought was waiting and lock it behind doors they had no key to. My years of building would not end in their laughter. They would end in my dignity. That night, when the lights went out and the house grew quiet, I sat alone with the papers. I touched the old leather folder where my will was kept. I ran my hand over the ink. And I decided, this was not an investment for them anymore. This was an investment for me, for my respect, for my peace, for the dignity no one could laugh away. The first cut that truly bled was not done with knives or poison. It was done with laughter. Small, careless, cruel laughter. At first, it came in moments so quick you could almost believe you imagined them. An eye roll at the dinner table when I asked for salt. A smirk when I told a story from my youth. A whisper behind a hand that stopped when I turned my head. These are not crimes you can hold in court, but they are wounds that eat at the soul. A man who gave his life to build a home does not expect to become a punchline inside it. I remember a holiday dinner when the table was full. My son's friends were there, his wife's cousins, neighbors from next door. The house smelled of roasted meat and wine. Everyone was laughing, glasses clinking. For a moment I thought it was joy. Then I reached for the gravy. My hand trembled, as old hands do. A drop spilled onto the tablecloth. Silence held the room for a breath. And then her voice, sharp, sweet, cruel. Careful, old man. Don't drown us all. Laughter burst from every corner of the room. My son smiled. He did not silence them. He did not defend me. He let the laughter grow. My face burned hot. I lowered my head. That was the first time I felt truly small at the table I had paid for. It did not stop there. Another night, I was invited to a party. A friend of my son's was hosting. I should have known better than to go, but I thought maybe there would be kindness in another house. I wore my old coat, polished my shoes, tried to stand tall. In the middle of the room, with music playing, she shouted over the crowd, "Can you hear me, Grandpa, or do I need to shout into your hearing aid?" People laughed again. My ears worked just fine, but in that moment, I wished they didn't. I wished I could shut out the sound of them mocking me like a clown. My son stood beside her, holding his drink, watching. His lips curled into a smile. He let them laugh. He let me burn. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the dark and thought of every sacrifice I had made. I remembered nights when I worked 2 shifts so my son could go to school. I remembered meals I skipped so he could eat. I remembered shoes I never bought so his feet would not walk bare. And here I was, mocked like a fool because my hands shook, because my ears bent to age. Age comes for all men, but respect should not leave with youth. A man is not less because his hair turns white. But in that room, I felt erased. I felt like a ghost sitting in the middle of my own life. From then on, every gathering became a stage for her. My son's wife treated my age like a prop. She would pat my shoulder in front of others and say, "Don't worry, he doesn't remember anyway." She would whisper just loud enough for people to hear, "He's like a child now." And the people around her would laugh, as if old age was a joke and not the weight every human will carry one day. The worst part was not her words. It was my son's silence. Silence is heavier than insults. Silence means agreement. Silence means he chose her mockery over my dignity. There is no greater shame than to be humiliated in public by your own blood. Strangers mocking you hurts, yes. But when your son stands beside them and does nothing, the knife twists deeper. It tells you that your sacrifices were wasted, that your love was blind, that the house you built was never truly your home. I felt that weight every time they laughed, every time her voice turned me into the evening's entertainment, and every time he let it happen. I began to see the truth. This was not a mistake. This was not stress. This was not a bad day. This was who they were. She saw me as a burden. He saw me as silent. Together, they saw me as nothing. My age was their stage, and my silence their permission. But silence is not forever. Every man has a breaking point, and mine was no longer far. Still, I stayed quiet in the room. I swallowed my anger like bitter wine. I let them laugh. I let them think I was powerless. Because the strongest revenge is not loud. It is not shouting across the table. It is not throwing plates or walking out. The strongest revenge is quiet, patient, written in ink, signed in law. They laughed at me for being old, but they forgot that an old man has something they do not. Time already spent building, papers already signed, money already earned. What they mocked was the very thing that gave me power. That first public snub, that holiday dinner with the spilled gravy and the sharp laugh, it lit a fire in me. Not a fire of rage, but a fire of clarity. I knew then that my future was not tied to their kindness. My dignity would not be left in their hands. If they wanted me gone, then gone I would be. But my wealth, my work, my years, those would not follow them. They would stay with me until the last breath. And when the time came, the papers would speak louder than her voice ever did. After that night, the humiliation did not stop. It grew. What started as small jokes turned into open attacks. Her words became sharper, her tone bolder, her eyes full of pride. She no longer whispered. She wanted me to hear. She wanted everyone to hear. At first, she had been clever, making jokes wrapped in smiles, pretending it was harmless. But once she saw that my son did nothing, once she knew he would never defend me, she became fearless. My shame became her sport. I remember one afternoon clearly. It was his birthday. The house was filled with family and friends. The table was heavy with food, the air full of laughter. She stood with a wrapped box in her hands, smiling as she handed it to me. Everyone's eyes turned to see what she had given me. I opened it slowly, my hands trembling with age. Inside was a baby's bib. On it, the words were stitched. Drool King. The room erupted in laughter. My face burned hot. I tried to smile. Tried to hide the sting, but I felt my heart break. She had turned my old age into a stage prop, and the audience loved it. My son stood there, clapping his hands, grinning, saying, "That's funny." Not once did he stop her. Not once did he defend me. It became a pattern. Every gathering, every event, every party, she found a way to strike. Sometimes it was a cruel gift, sometimes a mocking comment, sometimes just a sigh and a roll of her eyes when I tried to speak. She wanted me silent. She wanted me small. And the more she did it, the more my son allowed it, the braver she became. Humiliation became her weapon, and silence became his shield. Together, they cornered me until I felt like nothing more than an old shadow in a house I built. At dinners, she would lean close to others and whisper loud enough for me to hear, "He forgets everything, poor thing." When I tried to tell a story, she would interrupt with, "We've heard that one, Grandpa." If I dropped a fork or spilled a drink, she would clap her hands slowly, mocking me like a child. Every act was done in the open, with no fear. And why should she fear? My son gave her his silence. His silence told her I was hers to mock. But the worst moment came one Sunday. The family was gathered, cousins, uncles, neighbors. The house was full. She raised her glass and spoke loudly. "Let's toast to the old man. He's not really a man anymore, but at least he's old money. Not that I'll ever touch it. The laughter was cruel. My son laughed too. I sat there, my hands shaking, my face red, my chest tight. For the first time, I did not just feel shame. I felt something colder, not anger, not sadness, something sharper. Resolve. That night, I did not cry. I did not complain. I did not beg. I went to my room, opened the drawer where my will rested, and stared at the papers. For the first time I thought, this does not belong to her. She has no right to what I bled for. If she wants me erased, then I will erase her first. But I did not rush. Revenge is not loud. Revenge is not fast. Revenge is patient. So I kept silent. I let her think she had won. I let her think I was too old, too weak, too broken. While she mocked me in public, I began to plan in private. I visited my lawyer. I asked questions. I read clauses. I learned how to lock every door behind me so no hand could reach what I built. Quietly, with no noise, I began moving my future away from her reach. She thought my silence was weakness. She would learn it was strength. Still, the humiliation continued. Every day she found a new way to dig deeper. She controlled the conversations, the room, even my son's smile. My presence became her entertainment, my age her punchline. She did not know that every cruel laugh, every insult, every staged joke was fuel. Fuel for the fire I was building inside. Fuel for the decision I would one day reveal. The escalation was not just her cruelty, it was his betrayal. A wife can be cruel, but a son's silence cuts deeper. He could have stopped her with one word. He could have defended me with one look. But he chose her over me. He chose comfort over respect. That choice told me all I needed to know. He was no longer my son in heart. He was only my son in name. And a name means nothing when respect is gone. That birthday gift, that baby bib, that public toast, they were not just insults. They were warnings. Warnings that my place in their life was no longer father, no longer elder, no longer builder. I was the fool in their story. But they forgot something. Fools do not sign wills worth $3.1 million. Fools do not hold pens that can erase names and rewrite futures. She thought her words had power, but my ink had more. So I waited. I smiled. I stayed quiet. I let her think her laughter was victory. All the while, I sharpened my weapon. Not a knife, not poison, but the law itself. The escalation of her cruelty only pushed me closer to the moment I would show her that every insult has a price. That Sunday after the toast, the words kept ringing in my head. I could still hear her voice, clear as a bell, saying she would never touch my money. I could still see my son smiling as the room laughed. The shame warmed me for a moment and then cooled into something steadier. I lay awake that night and thought about the long road I had walked. I thought about the nights I worked while they slept. I thought about the mornings I rose early to fix a roof so their heads would not get wet. I thought about the bills I paid, the loans I cleared, the favors I did without a receipt. I thought about how easy it had been for them to call me useless when I had given them so much. I thought about dignity. I thought about the meaning of respect. And I decided that what I had built could not be left to laughter. I decided to act. The choice was simple. If they wanted to pretend my life had no value, then I would remove them from the list of people who would share in what I had earned. I would stop their ease. I would protect what I had left for those who deserved it. I found my lawyer the next morning. I did not shout. I did not cry. I walked into his office with my cane and a face that had made and buried many decisions before. I told him what had happened. I told him how my son and his wife turned me into a joke. I told him I would not live the rest of my days watched like a museum piece. He listened without surprise. He had seen this before, pride and silence, and then the hard choice to take back control. We spoke in plain terms. He explained what I could do and what would hold in court. He wrote down simple steps. The first thing I did was revoke any paper the family could use to take from my accounts. I closed an old joint account I had opened for convenience. I removed names from bank cards. I updated beneficiaries on life policies. I changed signatories on safe boxes. I moved money from places where a quiet phone call could empty it. I put the big sums where my son could not reach them with a pity or a plea. Then we turned to the will. We sat together and read the old document. It was written in a young man's mind, decades before, when I was sure the world kept its promises. It named my son and his wife. It spoke of shared tables and quiet Sunday mornings that would never happen now. My hand shook only a little as I signed the paper that would replace it. The new will was simple, clear, and final. I removed her name. I left the house in a different way. I set up a trust for the money so it would not be paid in one lump that could be wasted on parties and fancy dinners. I split the funds into parts. Part for charities that help the old and the poor, part for a cousin I trusted, part for a small fund for a grandchild who showed kindness, and the rest to a set of accounts that required proof of steady work and respect before the money could be touched. I told my lawyer to add a clause that would make any challenge costly for the challenger. I wanted them to know that if they tried to fight in court, they would lose more than the fight. They would spend money they did not have and drag their name through the very public place they loved, the gossip tables and dinner rooms. I asked for an independent executor, a man with no ties to the family, someone who would follow the paper and not his heart. I asked for clear rules. No transfers without approval, no access without proof. I asked the lawyer to draft a letter to the bank and to change who could talk to the bank about my accounts. I took back powers I had once given away. I canceled a power of attorney that had allowed my son to sign small checks in my name. I made sure the car title was put in a trust that would not open to them. I moved deeds so people who wanted to help would need more than a memory to get inside. I did not do this in anger. I did not do this for revenge in the way of harm. I did this to keep what I had earned from being wasted on people who saw my life as a joke. I did it to teach a lesson that is loud without shouting. Respect has value, and cruelty has a cost. After the documents were signed, I did something most people do not. I prepared for the noise. I wrote a short note to my son. I did not shout in it. I told him I loved him, that I had tried to make life easy for him, and that I felt betrayed by his silence. I told him I could not let my life pass into the hands of someone who celebrated my decline. I did not detail every change. I did not brag. I only said what had to be said, that the old man who built the house had the right to say where it would go. Then I wrote a separate short letter to his wife. It was colder. It was not cruel. It simply said that her name no longer appeared in my papers and that she should not expect anything beyond what she already had. I had watched her enjoy my name, but I would not let her enjoy my life. Finally, I asked my lawyer to send the changes by certified mail to the family, not to shout them aloud, but to make them official. The notice would land like rain on their table, clear, wet, and impossible to ignore. I was calm the day the letters went out. I poured tea and sat by the window. I thought of the years that had led to this quiet act. I thought of the nights I worked and the small hands of my son when he was a boy. I thought about how strange it was that men could change when the vows and the meals had been the same. I thought about grief. I thought about the dignity that had been stolen from me and the dignity I hoped to take back. I did not want them ruined forever. I wanted them to learn. I wanted them to feel hunger for kindness, to know how hollow a life of mocking can be. When the mail arrived at their house the next week, I knew the storm would come. I knew they would shout and plead. I knew they would try to press and beg. But I had made it hard for them to reach what they thought belonged to them. I had made the path narrow. I had closed many doors. The turning point was not a single act. It was a row of careful moves made to protect the work of a lifetime. It was the moment when I chose my own peace over their laughter. It was the moment I signed the last page and felt, not joy, but a long, slow relief, like a deep breath after holding it for years. When you are old, people think you are slow. They think you cannot move without help, that you cannot think beyond the walls of your own room. That is their mistake. Old age does not kill wisdom. It sharpens it. I did not shout at the table. I did not throw the gift back in her face. I did not slam the door. Instead, I began my work in silence. Quiet work. Careful work. Work that looked weak on the surface, but was strong in the foundation. The first step was my lawyer. I went back to him, this time not to speak about feelings, but to act with decisions. He asked me again, "Are you sure?" I looked him in the eye and said, "More sure than I have ever been." That was the end of the question. We opened the papers. We made lists. Every account, every property, every bond, every share. Piece by piece, we moved them into places she could not touch. I told him I wanted locks that even blood could not break, locks made of law. We added clauses that could not be undone, clauses that said any challenge to the will would mean the challenger received nothing, clauses that made sure my money could not be dragged into court battles, clauses that tied the funds to the people I chose, not to the people who thought they owned me. My lawyer smiled when he saw my clarity. He told me, "This is iron. Once it is signed, it will stand longer than you." That is what I wanted. I wanted my decision to live beyond me. Then came the trusts. I made one for charities, old age homes, places where people like me are pushed aside but still need dignity. I knew my money would do more good in those walls than in the hands of someone who laughed at wrinkles. I made another for my grandchild who still spoke to me with kindness, the only one who ever brought me a glass of water without being told. I tied the trust so it would open slowly, in stages, only when that child reached certain years, only with proof of work. I wanted the money to build, not spoil. I moved the house too. The house they thought was theirs, the house I had paid for with sweat and years. I put it into a foundation. It would still stand, but it would not be under their name. They could not sell it, they could not claim it, they could not use it as their golden cage. I had watched too many families destroyed by houses. I would not let mine be another. Every week I met with my lawyer. Every week I signed more papers. It became a ritual, no noise, no fight, just ink and witnesses. The silence of it gave me strength. They mocked me in public, but I was moving in private. They thought I was weak, but I was cutting their future with every signature. Quietly, patiently, without a single raised voice. But it was not only the big things I changed. I began to shift the small things too. The gardener, the one who kept their yard clean, I paid him directly, not through them. Then I cut the hours. The magazines they loved, I canceled the subscriptions. The little comforts they took for granted, the things they thought appeared by magic, began to disappear. At first, they did not notice. Then they complained. "Why hasn't this arrived? Why is this late? Why is this canceled?" I stayed silent. My silence was louder than their anger. I redirected my energy into people who valued me. Old friends, distant relatives, strangers who treated me with more respect than my own son. I gave small gifts, not in money, but in time. A visit here, a call there. I invested in people who saw me, not in people who mocked me. That was also part of the work. To remind myself that dignity was not lost in the world, only in their house. My son's wife noticed. She began to complain louder. "He's bitter. He's ungrateful. He doesn't help." She did not know the truth. I was helping myself. I was reclaiming what I had given away too freely. My son stayed silent, as always. Silence had become his only language with me. But silence cannot stop ink. Silence cannot stop the law. The more they mocked me, the more precise my work became. Every cruel word was another signature. Every staged joke was another clause. Every smirk was another transfer. They gave me fuel without knowing it. They thought they were breaking me down, but they were building my resolve. My patience grew stronger than their arrogance. I learned something in those weeks. Revenge does not always come with fire. Sometimes it comes with cold. Cold hands signing papers. Cold eyes reading lines. Cold decisions that cannot be undone. The quiet work of an old man can be more dangerous than the loud rage of a young one. Because the young strike fast and burn out. The old strike slow, and their mark stays forever. By the time the work was done, I felt lighter. Not happy, not joyful, but calm. Calm because I knew the future was no longer theirs to decide. Calm because I had locked every door they thought was open. Calm because I had reclaimed the dignity they tried to erase. When a storm comes, it does not always arrive with thunder. Sometimes it begins with a soft wind, so soft you do not notice until the branches start to bend. That is how I chose to send my message. Not with shouting, not with fighting, but with small things, little changes, tiny cuts that seemed like nothing at first, but together they became a wall they could not climb. The first thing I stopped was the gardener. For years, I had paid him to keep their yard green, their hedges trimmed, their roses bright. He came every week without fail. My son and his wife thought the clean yard was theirs to brag about, but it was my money that kept it so. One day, I told him to cut his hours in half. He nodded. The grass grew taller. The hedges grew uneven. The roses wilted. She complained, loud as always. Why does the yard look like this? Why are we paying for nothing? My son shrugged. He did not know I had already paid, but less. I said nothing. My silence was my answer. Then I canceled the magazine subscriptions. They liked glossy papers on the table. She showed them to guests as if they had been delivered for her alone. One by one, they stopped coming. The mail was thin, the table bare. She snapped at the mailman. She checked the box twice a day. Nothing. Again, I said nothing. The small comforts they loved were never theirs. They were mine. My hand had written the checks, my back had earned the money, and now my hand was pulling them away, one by one. Their life began to shrink. Not all at once, but slowly, like a rope tightening around them. The cable package, cut to basic. The streaming service, gone. The wine deliveries, stopped. At first, they thought it was a mistake. At first, they thought it was the company's fault. But mistakes do not come in chains. After the third, the fourth, the fifth, she began to see. It was me, the old man in the corner, the one she laughed at, the one she called useless, the one she thought had no power. She saw now that I was the hand behind her comforts, and the hand was closing. Still, I said nothing. I smiled at dinner. I listened to their complaints like soft music. I nodded when she cursed the companies. I let her believe whatever she wanted. Silence became my weapon. Silence made her guess, made her restless. She did not know what I would take next. That was part of the lesson. My son began to notice too. He asked small questions. Did you stop paying for this? Did you change something? I never lied. I only looked at him and said, things change. He knew. He felt it. But he did not speak against me. He was too proud to admit he depended on me. He was too weak to tell her the truth. His silence chained him again. The bills piled higher. The comforts grew fewer. They still had food. They still had heat. They still had the roof. But the shine was gone. No more wine to pour at parties. No more new magazines to lay out for guests. No more perfect roses to show off. Small things, yes. But small things build pride. And without them, their pride began to crumble. I saw it in her face. The smug smile faded. The sharp tongue grew restless. She could not laugh as freely at me when she had fewer things to laugh from. She began snapping at my son instead. She began asking where the money went. She began to fear. That was the message. Respect cannot be mocked. Respect must be fed. Without it, life begins to dry like grass without water. But I did not do this only to punish. I did it to show them a truth they had forgotten. Nothing in their house came free. Every light, every bill, every comfort had been bought by hands that worked before theirs. They thought I was old and weak. They thought I was a burden. But now, they saw the truth. They had been leaning on me all along. Without me, even the smallest joys slipped away. I wanted her to feel what I had felt when she mocked me. Small cuts, public shame, the slow drip of being made less. I wanted my son to see the weight of his silence. Every unpaid bill was the echo of his silence at that dinner table. Every missing comfort was his reward for letting her laugh at me. They had mocked me in front of others, now they learned in front of each other. The message was not loud. It was not written in letters. It was written in absence. The absence of magazines, the absence of roses, the absence of wine. Absence teaches more than presence. Absence makes people see what they never valued before. She learned quickly. She looked at me differently, not with respect, but with fear. That was enough. Fear is the shadow of respect. I carried myself with calm. I still sat at the table. I still smiled. I still ate my food in silence. But under that silence was the weight of the message. She could feel it. My son could feel it. They both knew the quiet old man was not as weak as he looked. The message in small things was the first taste. The storm had not yet broken. The will was still hidden, locked, sealed. But these small cuts prepared the ground. They showed her that every word had a cost. They showed him that silence could not save him. They showed both that the hand they mocked was the same hand that had fed them, and now that hand was closing. The day came quiet, like most turning points do. There was no storm outside, no loud argument, no fight in the kitchen. Only a letter, a plain envelope with my lawyer's seal. I had waited for this moment, planned for it, sharpened it with every signature I had made in silence. Now it was time. Time for the truth to walk through their door, not with shouts, but with paper. I did not hand it to them myself. I wanted the weight of the law to deliver it, not the trembling hand of an old man. So my lawyer mailed it, certified, official, undeniable. When it arrived, she was the first to open it. I sat in my chair and watched her face. At first, her eyes scanned quickly, confident, careless. Then slower. Her smile slipped. Her jaw tightened. The paper shook in her hands. She read again, as if a second time would change the words. But words written in law do not change. Her name was gone, erased, struck from the will like chalk wiped from a board. I will never forget the silence that followed. A woman who had mocked me every day suddenly had no words. Her tongue, always sharp, could not find a sound. My son reached for the paper. He read it too. His face fell pale. His lips parted, but no words came. He looked at me then, truly looked, for the first time in years. His eyes asked a question his mouth could not form. Why? But we both knew the answer. I sat still. I said nothing. I let the paper speak. It spoke louder than I ever could. $3.1 million, not hers, not his to control, divided, protected, guarded by iron clauses and sealed by signatures. My wealth was safe from their hands, my respect, written into law. She broke first. The woman who had called me useless, who had laughed at my trembling hands, who had handed me cruel gifts at parties, now trembled herself. She shouted, she cursed. She turned on my son, blaming him for not stopping it, for not watching closer, for not keeping me weak. Her voice rose high, but it was hollow. Anger cannot break paper sealed in court. Rage cannot unlock doors written with law. My son tried another path. He knelt beside me, voice soft, almost like the boy I once knew. "Father," he said, "we can fix this. You don't mean it. You were angry. Let's change it back." But his words were late. Too late. The lawyer had already filed. The ink was dry. The witnesses had signed. There was nothing to undo. I looked at him and saw the boy I raised buried under the man who betrayed me with silence. I said only this: respect is not a gift. It is earned. Then I turned my face away. The news spread fast through the family. Letters went out. Copies of the will, notarized and official, landed in mailboxes. Cousins called. Old friends whispered. Neighbors who once saw her strut in pride now watched her stumble in shame. Everyone knew. Everyone saw. The woman who had mocked my age was cut out of a fortune. The man who had stayed silent lost his standing. Their pride collapsed in public, just as they had humiliated me in public. They begged in private, she shouted in public. But both paths led to the same wall. The wall of legal finality. You cannot argue with ink once it is sealed by a court. You cannot shout down a paper stamped with a seal. They tried to meet the lawyer, to twist the meaning, to search for loopholes. There were none. Every clause was clear, every lock tight, every road closed. I watched them unravel, parties stopped, invitations dried up. Friends who once laughed with them did not answer their calls. Respect is a strange currency. Once people know you are cut off, they treat you like you are already poor. Even before the money is gone, your pride is gone, and when pride leaves, so do people. The day of reckoning was not one moment, it was many. It was her face pale over the letter. It was my son kneeling, whispering words too late. It was the silence at their table when no wine was poured, no magazines laid out, no roses in bloom. It was the look of neighbors as they walked past, eyes full of pity, voices full of whispers. But for me, the reckoning was quiet peace. I did not dance in their ruin. I did not smile at their shame. I only felt the calm of justice. The dignity I had lost at that dinner table, I now held in my hands again. They had mocked me for being old. They had forgotten that age is not weakness. Age is strength, built brick by brick, coin by coin, signature by signature. They thought I was finished, but in truth, I was the only one who could finish them. The letter was not just paper, it was a mirror that showed them who they truly were, greedy, cruel, careless with respect, and mirrors do not lie. Word travels faster than money. One letter in a lawyer's envelope carried farther than any of their parties ever did. Neighbors whispered over fences. Friends gossiped in quiet kitchens. Family passed the news in hushed phone calls. Soon the whole circle knew. The proud couple who mocked the old man had been cut out of the will. $3.1 million, redirected. Her name erased. His silence punished. At first they tried to hide it. They still dressed in fine clothes, still walked into gatherings with their heads high. But pride without power is thin. People saw through it. The shine was gone. The wine no longer flowed. The table spreads grew smaller. The roses in the yard turned brown. Guests noticed. Guests always notice. One by one, invitations they once sent came back ignored. Neighbors who once praised their dinners now found excuses not to visit. Friends who used to laugh at her jokes no longer answered her calls. The same people who clapped when she mocked me at the table now turned their backs when her pride collapsed. That is how people are. They love to laugh with you when you are high, but when you fall, they step back and watch. I saw the shift in her eyes. Once, she looked at me with mockery. Now, she looked at me with fear. Not because I shouted, not because I fought, but because she realized I had taken away what she valued most, the respect of others. Money is not only paper. It is weight. It is presence. It is influence. And when I cut her name from my will, I took that weight from her shoulders. Without it, she was small. Without it, she was ordinary. And ordinary was something she could not bear. My son suffered too, though in a different way. He had always stood silent. Now that silence echoed back at him. Men he once called friends stopped trusting him. They saw weakness. They saw betrayal. They saw a man who had let his wife insult his father and lose a fortune. Respect left him too. And without respect, even his voice grew thin. When he spoke, people no longer listened. I watched as they scrambled. They cut back on spending. They tried to borrow. They tried to impress with smaller dinners, cheaper wine, forced smiles. But people can smell desperation, and desperation is ugly. She grew bitter. Her words, once sharp toward me, turned sharp toward him. She blamed him for not stopping me. She blamed him for not controlling me. Their laughter at my expense had once held them together. Now their anger at each other began to break them apart. The social collapse was slow but sure. At church, no one sat close. At markets, whispers followed them. At family gatherings, invitations stopped arriving. They were not shunned openly. That would have been mercy. They were ignored quietly, a silence sharper than words, a cold shoulder harder than a slap. That is how society punishes, not with fists, but with distance. For me, It was not joy. I did not dance in their downfall. But I felt justice. Justice not written in courts, but in the way people treat those who have lost respect. I had been mocked publicly. Now, they were shamed publicly. Balance returned without me lifting a hand. Sometimes, I saw her stare at me across the room, eyes red, lips pressed tight. She wanted to speak. She wanted to lash out. But she couldn't. What could she say? That the man she called useless had outsmarted her. That the old hands she mocked had written her out of millions. That the burden she laughed at was the very foundation of her life. She could not speak it. The silence crushed her more than any words I could give. My son looked at me differently too. Not with anger, not with love, with regret. But regret is like ashes. You can hold it, but you cannot rebuild with it. It was too late. His silence at those dinners had already spoken for him. His silence had been his choice, and choices carry consequences. As weeks passed, they became smaller in every way. Fewer friends, fewer dinners, fewer smiles. They lived in the same house, but even the walls seemed to grow cold around them. I had taken nothing they had earned. I had only taken back what I had given. Yet in doing so, I had shown them the truth. Without me, they had nothing. The social collapse was not a punishment I shouted into existence. It was a punishment they brought on themselves. I did not destroy their respect. They destroyed it when they laughed at me. I only removed the mask. I only let the world see who they really were. And when the world saw, it turned away. People think when you strike back, the victory feels sweet. They imagine laughter, clapping, even a smile that never fades. But I will tell you the truth. It does not feel like that. It feels heavy. It feels cold. It feels like carrying a stone inside your chest that no one else can see. That is what justice feels like when it is real. After I signed the papers, after the lawyer sealed them, after the letters reached my son's house, I sat in my room and waited for peace to wash over me. But peace did not come the way I expected. Instead, came silence. Deep silence. The kind that presses against your ears until you feel it in your bones. I had done the right thing, but even the right thing has a cost. At night, I lay in bed and thought about all the years behind me. I remembered my son as a child, small and soft, looking at me with eyes full of trust. I remembered how he once reached for my hand to cross the road, how he cried when he fell, how he smiled when I lifted him up. I remembered every sacrifice, the shifts I worked, the meals I skipped, the shoes I patched instead of buying new. I remembered doing it all for him, telling myself one day he would repay me with care, with kindness, with respect, but instead he repaid me with silence at a dinner table while his wife humiliated me. That silence killed more than laughter. It killed the boy I had raised. I will not lie. The decision to cut them out gave me strength. It gave me back my dignity. It gave me back control. But dignity and control do not erase the ache in your chest when you realize your own blood has betrayed you. You can guard your money. You can seal your will. But you cannot seal your heart from remembering what could have been. Some nights I asked myself, what if? What if he had spoken up that night? What if he had said, stop? That's my father. Respect him, just one word. Just one defense. Would I have kept him in my will? Would I have passed the fortune with love instead of anger? Would I have died knowing my son carried both my name and my respect? The questions haunted me. They still do. But then I would see her face in my memory, see her standing tall with a cruel smile, mocking me in front of strangers. I would see my son beside her, smiling weakly, staying silent. And the answer returned, strong and sharp, no. They chose this path, not me. They chose to humiliate me. They chose to bury respect. I only answered with the one tool left to me, the law. The private cost I felt was not in dollars, not in property, not in gold. It was in the empty seat at my table. It was in the silence where family should have been. It was in the cold truth that my bloodline had failed me, and I had to put strangers and charities above my own son. That is a pain no old man wishes to feel. But it was the pain I had to carry. I did not show it to them. I never let them see me ache. To them, I stayed calm, silent, steady. I let them think I felt nothing. But inside, I grieved. Not for their loss, for mine. For the dream of an old age surrounded by respect, which would never come. For the memory of a boy who had grown into a man I no longer knew. This is what people do not understand about revenge. It is not about smiling at their fall. It is not about cheering when they suffer. It is about restoring balance. And balance is cold. Balance is heavy. Balance does not sing. It only sits there, like a stone in the chest, reminding you that justice comes with weight. And so I carry that weight. Alone, but not broken. Old, but not weak. Hurt, but not helpless. The cost is mine, but so is the dignity. And in the end, dignity is worth every ounce of the silence I now live with. The end did not come with shouting. It did not come with fists. It came quietly, the way winter creeps over autumn. Slowly, steady, final. Their mortgage went unpaid. Their parties ended. Their friends stopped calling. Their laughter, once loud and cruel, grew silent. I watched it all from my chair, not with joy, but with a kind of stillness. They had mocked me for being old, for being weak, for being a burden. But in the end, it was their own pride that became their burden. Her name was gone from every page, every clause, every line, every signature. She was erased. The $3.1 million they thought was waiting for them had already been placed where respect still lived. Charities, trusts, people who showed kindness. None of it would ever touch her hands. The woman who once handed me a cruel gift in front of strangers now had nothing but empty shelves where her trophies used to stand. The woman who once raised a glass to mock my age now had no glass left to raise. My son tried. He begged in whispers, but the law does not hear whispers. He asked me to change my mind, but my mind was already written in ink. The day he stayed silent at that dinner table, his choice was sealed. Silence has a price, and he paid it in full. I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice. I only told him the truth. Respect is worth more than money. That was all. No more words were needed. The rest was already written. I learned something in those final days. Age does not make you powerless. Age makes you sharper. Age teaches you patience. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought my calm was defeat. But silence can be stronger than rage. Calm can be sharper than any blade. They gave me humiliation. I gave them consequence. They thought it was a game. They found out it was a reckoning. The final line of my life story is not about wealth. It is not about houses or bank accounts. It is about dignity. They tried to strip it from me, but I took it back with the stroke of a pen. In the end, they lost more than money. They lost respect. They lost standing. They lost the comfort they once laughed from. And me? I sit here, old, tired, but not broken. I lost a son the day he chose silence. I lost a family the day she chose cruelty. That is a wound I will carry until the last breath. But I also gained something back. My dignity, my peace, the right to hold my head high again. She mocked my age and made me a joke. I made sure her joke had a price, and it cost her everything.